So this is my second and last quirky little taste on the subject of world making and space making, and it's a little perverse in that regard because we spent so much time talking about illusionism, and what I want to talk to you about now is about artists and game designers and animators who decided to insist that their world was rigorously flat. No illusion, no illusion in the Piero Caravaggio Tiepolo-esque, or even in the photographic sort of sense. And they're all united by a commitment to what we might call modern tenets of being factual about your medium, about being literal about the flatness of the painted canvas or the screen. And we're going to see just how this works out. So let's look at the first work. It's Piet Mondrian's Broadway Boogie Woogie from 1942 to 1943. I keep saying this, but another favorite painting of mine. And it's got a kind of representational title, right? Broadway Boogie Woogie, that conjures the world of Broadway, the Great White Way in New York, where all the theater and entertainment venues were in Mondrian's time. And it also conjures music, right? Boogie Woogie music. And Mondrian was quite a fan of Boogie Woogie music. So even though this is a completely abstract painting, it's primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, on a white ground, arranged in an abstract geometrical form that kind of seems to maybe conjure the street grid, but also seems to maybe kind of conjure musical staffs and notes on that musical staff, and also seems to maybe kind of conjure the blinking energy of a neon lit Broadway landscape. But it actually is none of those things. It's lines and areas of color, and if we treat the white as also areas of paint, then there is no figure and no ground. There are white rectangles and red rectangles and yellow kind of elongated line rectangulish things and little squares, and there is no depth. There is just surface, and that was super important to Mondrian, the literal flatness of the canvas, the sort of literal sense of the rhythm of color and linear organization, and an absolute rejection of pictorial effects of shadow and atmosphere and romantic moodiness and all of the things that Mondrian was trying so hard to get out of his work. And it really was a process of getting it out of his work, and that's what I want to talk to you about in greater detail. But first I want to signal to you the leap that I'm ultimately going to attempt to make, and that leap is from Mondrian to the game of Pong. And I got to thinking about this for a number of reasons that I'll explain in detail, hopefully, as I go along. But I'm really interested in the game of Pong because kind of I can remember when it came out, and remember being so fascinated with something that was so simple, a game of kind of ping-pong tennis in which there really wasn't much to see. There was a little square that floated back and forth across the screen. There was the ability to move something like another little rectangle up and down the screen to be batted away by the other player. And there was something that maybe kind of looked like a ping pong table or a tennis court seen from above. But the funniness of that is that you were seeing it above, even as you're imagining it from above, you're looking at it from across. So not a lot there, but a game that fascinated people in the 1970s and continues to kind of fascinate people today. So let me see if I can do it. Well, this is Mondrian in an earlier register, and here, although we can talk a bit about the literal application of paint, the way in which you can see each brush stroke explicitly, we can talk about a kind of complex interweaving of figure and ground, the kind of branches that sort of weave back and forth on and in and through a gray surface, and we can talk about a tree. The title of the painting is Gray Tree, and you can see a tree. You can see something happening to the tree. You can see perhaps an artist asking, how can I look at the world and find abstraction through rigorous analysis, something like the Cubist practice as well. And it's not surprising that Mondrian is working in this vein about the same time that Picasso and Braque are working in the moment of high Cubism in Paris. But a tree nonetheless, something like a tree turning into, we might say, a tree turning into a grid. Fast forward just a little bit to 1913, and it's no longer called a tree. It's tableau number 2, composition number 7 from 1913. And one gets a sense that illusion is precisely what's being pushed out of this painting, that the grid is being brought forward, that the insistence that line and color are occupying a single plane is being ratcheted up, and that the question of how to organize the picture as a whole is a matter of organizing those abstract geometrical relationships more than it is a matter of making an illusion. And there was another artist who said, you know, not too many years before this painting was made, the French artist Maurice Denis, who said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing here, so don't send me little don't send me little text saying that I quoted it wrong. But Denis says this. He says, you have to remember as an artist, before it is a painting of a battle or a landscape or a nude, it is lines and colors arranged on a flat plane, and that is what a painting is. So you can see Mondrian sort of asserting that is what a painting is. And he goes from there to a more and more rigorous investigation of how much can be stripped away from illusionistic painting and still have a painting. Still have all the signifiers of intentionality, still have a surface that's organized in an intended and interesting way. You can see pretty clearly the leap from something like this lozenge composition from 1921 to Broadway Boogie Woogie. In fact, if anything, with Broadway Boogie Woogie, you can say once Mondrian got here, got to this point of asserting that the only angle one can take to the picture plane is not the angle of foreshortening, right? Not the angle of a kind of illusionistic perpendicular object in relationship to the picture plane, but the angle of a kind of sideways shift, the diamond shape being imposed on the square canvas here, and then the color being kind of parsed out, almost as if there's a weird mathematical equation to this painting that you just don't have, or some kind of weird algorithm that's behind it, just as a lot of binary dots and dashes were behind the game of Pong. I think Mondrian would have liked Pong quite a lot. He would have liked its rigor. He would have liked its simplicity. He would have liked its absolute minimalism in terms of the relationship between figure and ground, and it's actually really kind of hard to talk about figure and ground in Pong. There's a famous story about Mondrian that sort of informs Broadway Boogie Woogie a bit, and the story goes something like this. Mondrian was at one of the jazz clubs that he liked to frequent, where his beloved Boogie Woogie music was being played, and he was dancing, and it's kind of funny to think about Mondrian dancing because his paintings are so precise. So imagine what a very precise person would be like dancing to Boogie Woogie music, but he was having a really good time. And then all of a sudden, the music changed to a different form of jazz. And Mondrian stopped dancing and he said, "Let's sit down, I hear melody." And melody was figure-ground relationships. Melody was illusionism. Melody was all the kind of lushness of a romantic pictorial style that Mondrian had spent so much time getting out of his work, distilling painting down to its very elements: line, color, black, white, red, yellow, blue. It's not only the notion of boogie woogie and the electronic ding dong of the game of Pong that causes me to want to make a connection to Robert Cannon's great cartoon done for UPA in 1951, Gerald McBoing Boing, done from a story after Dr. Seuss, who was also working in and around the UPA artists at the time. So it's not just the boing boing, the rhythm, rather than the melody. It is the UPA artists' interest in getting all of the round, multiplane, quasi-cinematic illusionism of the Disney films out of their animations and saying, well, if an animation is really drawn figures on a ground, how can we imagine a form of animation that has all of the strength of character and story, but is not cloaking it in all of those illusionistic effects as being very explicitly a drawing, a moving drawing in its own right. So in Gerald McBoing Boing, which I hope that you will watch it in its entirety, it's not a matter of putting figures in front of a ground, of actors on a stage, as it would have been in classical perspectival drawing, and as it would have been in the more completely illusionistic films that were coming out of the Disney studios at the time. It was that the figures were to be inseparable from the ground. And so it's really, really hard. You believe you're in Gerald McBoing Boing and his family's home, but that home is given with the slightest and most elemental forms of notation. The chandelier sort of floating up in the air, if we can say, without there being sort of ceiling lines or wall lines, a chair sufficing to prop open space. And there's a marvelous sequence where little Gerald surprises his father while he's shaving, and his father's pretty upset about that because he almost cuts himself. And Gerald walks upstairs kind of very sad and crestfallen for having nobody understanding the way he speaks only through sound effects. And it almost looks as if he's walking up a Mondrian painting. It's that stripped down. And the artists of UPA, especially Julius Engel, who actually founded the experimental animation program at Cal Arts, would often ask themselves, I mean, they were great students of arts themselves, many of them had art school educations, and would look at each other's work and would say, well, are you thinking about this in a Braque kind of way? Are you thinking about it in a Picasso kind of way? Are you thinking about it in a Mondrian kind of way? And so I end this kind of notion of the collapse of figure-ground relationships, the distillation of elemental experience, and the kind of ideas of up seen from below, with this last work of art by the French artist Pierre Huyghe, a contemporary artist, this work from 1999 called Atari Light, that is an homage to the Pong game. It's an installation work in which the viewer's audience can come in and from the ground play the game of Pong on the ceiling over their heads, play it as if it was a Tiepolo painting, play it as if they were ping pong players who could float in the air. And we understand the ways these notions of kind of figure-ground relationships, of different perspectives, and different ways of imagining the reach of the human body and of imagining the body exceeding that reach span a range of practices, from painting to gaming to animation, to contemporary installation art. And Huyghe very interestingly says of this work and others that he's done, that as he says, as I start a project, I always want to create a world, and the world is the work.